Week 7 is communication. This is our second to last lesson of this group. So let's get into communication. The objectives that we're going to be working on are to understand the framework of effective communication. This will be a shorter lesson just so you can have some tools to immediately try to integrate. Communication is something that there's so many different schools of thought. There's so many different ways that you can take this. So I wanted the lesson to be really tangible so that you could take what you need and put it into practice. So there'll be a lot of skills to try to utilize during this lesson. Second is learn how to optimize your ability to communicate your needs and desires with ease. And then there's going to be lots of practice tools to utilize during communication to ensure understanding. With communication, oftentimes the anger or frustration that comes up is often a miscommunication of what you're trying to say or to communicate to your partner. Verbal spoken language is our second language. In the last presentation, we mentioned that your first language is energetics. So the language you're hearing right now might not even be your second language. It might be your third language if your second language is from a different country. But your first language is energetics. Second is whatever spoken language that you grew up learning. Third could be English. I know a couple of people, again, are from different countries. So this might be their third language that they're hearing and trying to understand, which of course you can kind of think like, wow, a third language. So whatever I'm saying takes a second to process and to interpret into the context of culture. There's lots of different ways that communication can be interpreted, again, based on culture, based on societal beliefs, based on context, based on your own beliefs, based on your perception. So spoken language is often just a frustrating topic because there's so many different ways that you can receive what I'm saying. Our primary language, again, if you remember from last week, is energetics, nonverbal communication. So if I came on here and I was having a bad day, you would feel that from me and you would interpret how or what to expect from this presentation based off of the energy that I was putting out into the field for you to receive. Also, you're reading my facial expressions, my tone of voice, my body language to determine how is Kat doing today? Is Kat a threat or not? So learning our second language, verbal language, is our secondary means of communication. We are often limited in our ability based on how deeply we understand our own internal experience. This is why doing deep work or deep healing work is very beneficial because we often have a very limited range of what we're comfortable expressing as far as mental, emotional communication. So if that is not something that you ever explored in your life or were taught, then that means your range might be pretty small as far as what you're comfortable, how you're comfortable expressing yourself. So the deeper that you can build understanding of what specifically does this emotion mean and feel like in my body, what does it mean to how and what I need, you are creating a bigger container to be able to explore an emotional range and create context, communication, further descriptors of exactly how you're feeling, exactly what you need to create more understanding. You can think about the last time someone really took the time to understand you, even below that surface level, like, hi, how are you? They really asked probing questions and you felt comfortable sharing, like, maybe what you are going through, and they were able to empathize with you and just really feeling understood is such a deep level of intimacy that I'm hoping this series will help you to be able to facilitate in all of your relationships because it is an amazing way to experience connection, intimacy, love, friendship, all of those great things. And so this slide, I hope that you're like, oh, again, yes, this is such an important map, an important image to be able to use because the higher that you climb on this activation of your vagus nerve or your survival fight or flight response, the less that you can actually see. So if you are feeling good and you're in the green zone, you feel really connected and curious and in the grounded and in the present moment, and you're having communication with someone and they say something that activates you in some way. Maybe they say something about your dress and you're already feeling self-conscious about your dress, and it activates that fight or flight response. And then all of a sudden you are anxious because you're like, oh my gosh, they're judging what I'm wearing and I'm already judging what I'm wearing. And so your ability to actually remain resourceful gets smaller, as we've talked about before. And you start to focus on that one little thing. And that's all your communication is centered around. And when that happens, you can't really hear that they're like, oh no, I wasn't talking about your dress. Like I was talking about, whatever. You're just continue to associate that triggered response to your feeling of anxiety. So even if they are trying to explain themselves, you're not in a headspace now to really, really actually hear what they're saying. So what happens is you just start to miscommunicate because this person's looking at this part of the pie and you're looking at this part of the pie. So you're just looking at two completely different pieces of the puzzle. And oftentimes that's where lots of confusion, conflict, frustration, irritation, panic, higher states of anxiety, worry, or concern come in, just a miscommunication. And then, when you get into that blue zone and you're completely shut down, that makes communication even harder because you don't see anything besides I am not safe and I need to do what I need to do in order to stay alive right now. Or you dissociate from your experience and you have this like out of body experience where you're like, I'm not even present in my body right now. I'm dissociated. That happens a lot when your body goes into that state of overwhelm. So the more activated you become, the less resourceful you become. You get tunnel vision, you start to tense up. And remember, if you start to tense up, you clench your fists, you're clenching your jaw, your body just feels tense, you go into that survival mode. That is the primary language that you're communicating. So if you go into that state, again, this is especially true for when you're around kids and dogs or animals. When you go into that state, you will feel people retract from you based on your body tension. So, based on that primary language that you are communicating, you're telling them something is not safe about my experience, and then they might actually go into more defensive mode. This is how those energetics are always intertwining and interplaying with each other, ebbing and flowing in each other's existence because it's our primary language. It activates your animal nature, indicating that the situation is threatening and causes you to become defensive. So as soon as you hit that squiggly line, you really do kind of take on animalistic qualities. You start to say, I'm not safe. You're worried about survival. So you're preparing for impact, preparing for action, more hypersensitive. It's not really a great time to continue to communicate about something that is triggering because it'll just keep getting worse. Sometimes in conflict, I think like getting things out is helpful, especially if they've been stuffed away and they just need to come out. However, sometimes that could be detrimental because of how it's delivered. So it's a really delicate balance. If something's delivered in a way that is very hurtful for the other person to receive, then conflict management and really focusing on a solution and solution-oriented mindset is important there. But again, once you hit that squiggly line, it's not usually a great place to continue a solution-oriented conversation because you're both not going to see each other's point of view. It'll be really frustrating and hard. And we've also talked about once you're in that state for a prolonged period of time, it starts to hurt your health. So if you like conflict and you like feeling that adrenaline and that cortisol be released, just know that it's also taking a toll on your health over time, causing incoherence, causing your body instrument to become out of tune. So stress reduction, stress resiliency is really important for your overall health and for the health of the relationship. With detrimental impacts of poor communication, you start to create a negative feedback loop with the person that you love. So the more that you have conflict and you don't work towards a solution, or you allow your emotions to get the best of you and you just keep yelling at each other, and there's miscommunication and frustration and irritation and anger and rage and all those emotions, you start to associate your person, the person that you love, as soon as you see them, because you felt this energetic imprint from them. Just even seeing them sometimes can activate your system. You go into defense mode, and this creates more distance in the relationship. You start to use accusatory language, which places blame on the person and creates an atmosphere of shame. So if you're telling your partner or loved one, like, it's you, what does this remind lots of people of? Like, usually getting yelled at by a parent. When you're getting yelled at by a parent, that creates a sense of shame or I'm bad. And when you feel a sense of shame or I'm bad, that is literally one of the lowest vibration emotional states that you can feel. And you will not be open for connection or love if you are constantly being reminded or feeling like you are in a state of shame. You create a biochemical experience within your own body, which negatively impacts your health over time. So again, when you allow your emotions to get the best of you, that you are like, I actually like conflict, I like arguing, you're creating a biochemical change within your biochemistry, which negatively impacts your health over time. This is a fear avoidance model. It has more to do with physical injury, but it has since changed or been altered to also include this concept of an emotional injury. So just picture the word emotion above this word injury. So this is kind of how that negative feedback loops gets created. So you have an emotional injury, or maybe your partner hurts your feelings. You have this painful experience. Your whole body's like, ow, that freaking hurt. And then you can go one or two ways. If you are totally prompted and you have all of the skills from all this stuff and you've worked with me, you can go on the right hand side. You have no fear. You're like, oh, I know what conflict is. It's just a misunderstanding of an area we haven't explored yet. Great, let's confront it together. We have the tools to move towards a solution. Or you can move towards the left hand side. So you have this painful experience. All of a sudden, you have this negative impact that's happening. In this case, it's threatening illness information, but in terms of an emotional experience, it's like, oh, they're placing shame on me. They're saying it's you. This is where blame happens. So you have that painful experience. All of a sudden, blame happens. You're feeling really bad. And then all of a sudden, you start to catastrophize. Oh, this is not the right relationship, or this is not my person. I don't like them. They're bad. I'm bad. We're bad together. And then you can start to develop fear, like, oh, well, what happens if they leave me? What happens X, Y, and Z? You become very hyper vigilant, or you avoid. That's when the fight or flight state really, gets kicked into gear there. Fight or flight, or maybe even freeze. And then disconnection happens on the top there. So disuse, depression, disability, disconnection. And then when you're disconnected, you feel more pain. And then when you feel more pain, you feel more shame. And when you feel more shame, you feel like this is the worst thing in the world. I'm in a bad relationship. I don't know what happens if we separate. I'm hyper vigilant. So anything that they say irritates me. And you start to get in this negative feedback loop of your partner just based on your inability to navigate conflict. Because again, we don't really ever have the education, the tools, or the knowledge to navigate these waters. So they get us stuck. And then lots of people are like, well, fine, I'm just going to go find a new relationship. And they end it, but they still don't have the tools to be able to navigate conflict. So they always end up back kind of in this left-hand spot with a different person. So when you get back to the painful experience, that's oftentimes the work that I do with people is they tap back into something that it doesn't feel great, but instead of getting stuck in the left-hand side, they start to catastrophize fear, hyperavoidance, hypervigilance, disconnection. We find a new neuro pathway. We create neurofeedback, neuroplasticity in behavior change to be able to move towards a right side communication, solution oriented pathway to growth and reconnection. There's so much on the internet about active listening, and you probably had a work module that you had to take at some point in your training at your job. These are just 4 simple check-in points that I like to reiterate that I think are really important. The number one is putting aside all distractions. When you have your phone next to you and it lights up and you're like listening, but then your phone is lighting up, it's taking you away from being present in the conversation. The next part of that number one is to set an intention. Okay, we're having this conversation. I'm going to be present. I'm going to put all my distractions away and I'm going to be here with you. Second is focusing on the speaker, maintaining eye contact as much as you can. You don't have to sit there and just stare at them because that's a little bit irritating as well. Showing interest through verbal and nonverbal cues. So you can just acknowledge, like with a yes or a no or a nodding at various points throughout the conversation, just to make sure that they know you're paying attention. Allowing for full completion of the speaker's thought. It's super when we don't agree with something or we have something to interject to maybe try to help them understand more, we like to cut people off, but it's important to let the person speak their thought fully through. Let them, first of all, like hear themselves talk, get it out, and then you can respond when they're done talking. Summarize what you heard by saying, what I'm hearing you say is, what I'm interpreting from what you said is, what I take away from what you said is. And that allows them to hear how you received it. And then they can add anything that they need to in order to clarify their position or what they meant. So just that check-in will be like, okay, what you said, what I heard, this is what I heard. Is that what you meant? And then they can adjust if it's not in accordance with what they meant or intended. So in this process, just giving you kind of like a step 1, what do I do? Step 2, what do I do? Step 1 is check in with your primary language, which is your energy. So your emotional state. Am I putting off the vibe through my body language that I am interested or uninterested in what you have to say? All of these emotions with the smiley faces are, what is your emotional state? Are you in a good headspace to have a constructive conversation? Are you feeling too angry? What is my tone of voice? Do I notice, like if I checked in with myself and I was like, all right, you're being a little aggressive with your tone, can you adjust that? Number 2 is if you notice like I'm not really in a great space for communication or for it to be effective, go self-regulate. So excuse yourself, get some space, say, I'll be back when I'm feeling a little bit in a better headspace to continue this conversation. Take 10 deep breaths, spending a longer time focusing on the exhale. Honestly, this is like such a great, easy, underutilized practice. Just breathing in, full deep breath. And then on the exhale, you're going to breathe out longer than you focused on the inhale. We're going to do that 10 times. After the first breath, you will feel a significant release in the tension that you feel. So 10 deep breaths will help you to be centered. Excuse yourself and go for a fast-paced walk with the intention of moving the energy out that needs to get out. Adjust your body orientation. So this is an exercise that we will cover, leaning forward and backwards. So when you notice that you are in an activated state, you are leaning forward often. You're leaning forward, you notice your body weight is forward, and that orientation is meant for survival mode or to help you to be prepared to fight the predator, whatever sort of threat that you feel right in front of you. So adjusting your body orientation is noticing that you're leaning forward and then actively lean back. Lean back on your back foot, lean back in your chair, just leaning back and maybe doing some deep breaths in that leaned back position. That's activating something called your vagal brake, and it will help you to feel the activation of your parasympathetic nervous system or your rest and digest state. You can use red light, green light. Say, red light, I need to take a second here. I can't go any further because I notice myself kind of losing my ability to continue to communicate. Green light is like, yes, I'm ready to go. You really have to use the green light piece if you're sitting down ready for it, but over communicating in this state is always helpful. Changing your visual perspective. So again, when you are noticing that you are leaning forward, you hone in on one little aspect of your partner. Maybe you're like, I hate your shirt, but you don't say this. You're just like, I hate your shirt. Leaning back and looking in your peripheral environment. So you're noticing you're focused on your partner shirt, and now I want you to lean back and you're focusing on something in the peripheral environment. So now you're seeing the wall, you're seeing the other wall, maybe you're seeing the ceiling or the floor, or you see something past your partner. This is also helping to activate your parasympathetic nervous system and allowing you to expand your tunnel vision to see more of what's happening and allow you to become more resourceful in your ability to navigate what is actually happening. Another thing that you can do is write it out. Find out what the problem represents. Oftentimes, the problem that we see in the immediate moment is not the actual problem. It's just representing the problem, representing a problem. So if you can write it out, just write for 5 minutes. What is it about this thing that I was so mad about? Lots of times it's like, oh, I don't feel appreciated, or oh, I'm not feeling seen, or oh, I feel disconnected from you. So this little avenue that we use to discharge the energy that we've held in about this problem we're experiencing has a lot more to do with something that's not being communicated, not being seen or witnessed. So the writing it out thing helps to find what the problem is. Limiting the use of you. Lots of times when we use you, we're using accusatory language, and what we hear is it's your fault. And when you hear it's your fault, you automatically go into defense mode. You lose the ability to work as a team. So limiting the use of you. One of your homework assignments is going to be that in your next conversation with somebody, trying to limit how much you actually say you. It's pretty hard. Step 4, practice using I feel blank. When this happens, it feels like blank. The story I'm telling myself is I can see how I blank because it makes me feel blank, right? So just playing with you and I, taking responsibility for the way it making you feel, how you're interpreting it, are two hidden shortcuts or two hidden hints for conflict management, for more effective communication. This is step 5, but be clear and concise as possible. When you use too many words when you're babbling, it's very confusing to try to pay attention to like what you actually mean. So practicing just being very clear. I feel this way. And trying to limit how many words that you use. Again, this is hard and it takes practice, but being clear and concise, using I feel, and being aware of your energy or your emotional state are 3 really good tips and tricks to utilize in being more effective with communication. You can use these prompts to really continue to foster a loving environment and help you to feel safe to communicate how you're feeling through vulnerability. So, what is one way I can make you feel safer to tell me what's going on? What is one thing I can improve on to help with our ability to communicate? What is one thing I do that helps you to feel understood? These are prompts I would encourage you to do while you're like on a walk or at dinner or something where you are not fighting about anything. You're not feeling a certain type of way. You're just more curious about how can I make you feel safer when we are in communication for you to tell me what's going on. Review. Energetics are our primary language. Spoken language is our second language that we use to attempt to use words to describe our internal experience. Again, this is where doing deep inner work is great, or being more comfortable with exploring your emotional range creates a bigger container for you to be able to develop the language to tell people how you are actually feeling and what you need. Communication can become frustrating and less effective in an activated state. So when you hit fight or flight, you start to turn into an animal and you lose the ability to use your frontal lobe or your more advanced mind to communicate what you need. Utilizing I versus you language is important to reduce blame shame game. And your homework for this week is practice using I versus you. So you're going to intentionally focus on the use of I during conversation. Assess how challenging it is to stay in your own experience versus placing blame on the other person. This one's huge. Discuss the positive or negative change in the effectiveness of the conversation. How did it help when you focused on just like how you are interpreting the experience versus placing any sort of blame on the other person? So try out this homework and go back through the presentation. Just look at like little tips that you want to take during this week when you are communicating, and see if you can really intentionally put them to practice. And I will see you for our final week next week.